Welcome to this session on Recalibrating International Relations. Welcome to our speakers as well from all over the world. We have a little UN here at the table. We're going to start with a short exercise. I'm going to ask each one of the speakers to write on this piece of paper, on each one. Do you have all the pen? To write the first word that comes to your mind when you think about international relations. Don't show to your sides. Ready? Okay, we can turn them at the same time. 1, 2, 3. I think the camera is going to show it from above. I'll try to read the handwriting. What do we have over here? Trust, interdependency, inclusiveness, and power. So let's expand a little bit on that, each one around 1 minute. Why don't we start over here? Trust, how come?
Well, thank you very much. I think we have entered an era in international relations when there is, in fact, utter lack of trust. So for me, I think this is the fundamental basis for forging international relations. And whenever there has been trust at the international level, we have seen better relations. The lack of it has led to conflict and friction. And we have seen how, for instance, the lack of trust that continued even in the aftermath of the First World War led to, for instance, a failure of the Treaty of Versailles or the short-lived League of Nations. The League of Nations didn't have the support of the United States of America. And in the 1930s, as mistrust developed, you found a very large number of countries leaving the League of Nations. Japan left, Germany left, Italy left, and finally the Soviet Union left in 1939. It led to a situation where the global community descended into the Second World War. So in order to avoid wars, one of the fundamental requirements is trust. But with trust comes the all-important aspect of transparency and the ability to read not just capabilities, but also intention.
And is a group like G20, for example, based on values, on interest, on both? Does it leave out others that are not like-minded?
So I think the G20 presidency of India is quite unique because it's people-centric, both within the country, that means 1.4 billion people for the first time in the history of any G20 presidency. The entire population of a large country like India has been involved. And it is also a G20 presidency in which the abiding principle is leave no one behind, literally. And that is also the sentiment expressed in the UNGA resolution 75/1 of 21st September 2020, marking the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. Leave no one behind. That comes from our ancient wisdom, our civilizational heritage of the world is one family, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. I'm not suggesting here that there are no similar sentiments in other civilizations. I know for a fact that large countries like India and China may in fact share in terms of their civilizational outlook and a concept of inclusivity. Professor Chan has mentioned inclusiveness. I know even in Chinese there is the saying, 四海之内皆兄弟也, or 四海为家, that the world is one family. So here we are speaking of our ancient Asian heritage. The world would be a much better place if large countries and populations like India and China were to build a new paradigm based on equality and inclusiveness in a multipolar world. So
these are similar values there, I see. Of course. And are they so much more different from other regions of the world, or do you think that you can work with that with others?
For me, we have entered a very complex period in our history. 77 years after the United Nations was set up, it really has failed to meet the needs of the time. The power quotients along every axis have changed in terms of the redistribution of military power, economic power, and some might say even soft power and smart power, or hard power, in any case, is a reflection of military power. And so we have now a set of what I call the 6 T's that bedevils every geography across the world. The first is trade and the kind of contestation that goes with trade, but it is something that's hard to control. Trade is fungible. It's not governments that run trade, which is why we see China's trade with India or with the United States or with Japan shooting up, even at a time of tensions, for instance. Then there is the T of technology, where it's much more possible for governments to interfere through sanctions and export controls. The third T is that of territorial disputes. Whether in Asia or in Europe, you see that it is fracturing the consensus. The fourth T is that of terrorism, which has now become a feature in every part of the world, and without peace and security, there's no development. The fifth T is that of tenets. Of? Tenets, as in narratives. Whose narrative is superior? Is it the liberal, open democratic system, or is it the quasi-liberal or state-led capitalism, democracies versus autocracies? And it has descended into that. And the last one is the T of trust, which I began with. So this is something that is now present in all geographies. And unless we address these 6 T's, along with a very rich dose of transparency, we're not going to get anywhere.
So we have a 7th T there.
Yes, today I'm adding the 7th one to my own set of 6 T's.
7, not 6. Good. So I want to tie this a little bit together. So
could I just comment on the
yes, of course, please
Industrial Revolution part? I'm just tempted to reflect on this. From my point of view, the first Industrial Revolution, the invention of the locomotive or the steamship, in fact, was in the service of largely colonialism. The second Industrial Revolution also saw a very large part of the world becoming colonies in terms of the hinterland that provided resources for the Industrial Revolution in what we today call the global north. And the third Industrial Revolution was the first time when the information age set in, but also the era of large-scale, low-cost manufacturing, the shifting of the global engines of economic growth from traditional areas in North America and Europe to parts of Asia. That was a real opportunity for creating a level playing field. But as globalization has developed, a very large part of the global economy has slipped through the cracks and not benefited equally from the third industrial revolution. The most insidious one is round the corner, the one with quantum physics and artificial intelligence and big data. And this discourse is greatly complicated by the real possibility of decisions not being made by nation states, but also being driven by transnational entities, big tech, big business, where the fundamental principle is profit. It is not values. So what we need to create is a structure at the global level where big tech acts responsibly without curbing their sort of animal instincts to create innovation and new technologies. They have to be reined in a bit.
So how would we amend it? For example, the G20 now led by India this year. How would it amend it such a thing? Because you said our sort of mission is to leave no one behind, which you're saying now is increasingly difficult because of all these things. So how, in a as concrete way as possible, could nation states avoid this?
I would believe that to some extent technologies have to be made profit agnostic, and that we must learn to share technologies. And this is going to be relevant to the discourse, particularly with regard to climate action. For if we keep speaking about mitigation without heeding the major challenge of adaptation in the global south, we are not going to be able to handle the great commons of the air that we commonly breathe or the water that we commonly drink. It's not going to be enough for one part of the world to be devoting resources to make the necessary transitions, and a very large part of the world not making those transitions. So it's in our interest today to de-link certain technologies from being profit-oriented to making them profit-agnostic in the larger interests of mankind. If we're able to do this, and particularly without weaponizing technologies, mankind, as in humankind, I should say, will progress more rapidly. I think the approach to climate action is also different. An ancient country like India looks at climate action as not just a responsibility of governments, but also of the individual. And that is why the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi, has proposed at COP26 in Glasgow an idea called Lifestyle for Environment, which is essentially about creating pro-planet people. And the way to create pro-planet people is to make every individual sensitive to this task and to further what we call sustainable consumption. At whatever level of standard of living that he or she may have in any part of the world, it is possible to act responsibly. Whether you have 3 6-cylinder SUVs in your garage or whether you have none, it is possible to act in a responsible manner. So curbing what we call mindless, profligate consumption is something that we should look at. And I think that's also something that speaks to the theme of circular economy and repair, reuse, recycle kind of stuff.
But beyond the individual responsibility, at the G20 level, for example, do you all see it the same way?
I think in the G20, the task will be to build better consensus because the approach points are different. Some may favor mitigation, others may favor adaptation. We've heard that in the course of the last 2 days. So the point is there will have to be some kind of halfway house, some kind of compromise. But just because the G20 doesn't have a magic wand doesn't mean that we regard it as irrelevant. It's the only place today where without a privileged veto power or absolute great power exceptionalism, you can put some of the most important economies and countries in the world together in an inclusive manner by inviting, as India has done, special invitees, 9 of them, and actually have a dialogue where even the contestants, those that are engaged in major power contestation, may see the benefits of pulling away from the gridlocked traffic jams on the highways of multilateralism to engage in a genuine dialogue and see if something can be done. However incremental. A G20 is not to be seen as a 100-meter dash.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing process. We have to pass on responsibly the baton to the next runner in the relay.
Right.
Or I'd say that the most important thing for the road ahead would be the responsible exercise of power, whoever has it. Whether it's political power, whether it's economic power, this power, this word itself is very potent. One must realize that to best appreciate power, one must also know the limits of power. So the exercise of power must come with great responsibility. Absolutely. It must be done in good faith. And one must also acknowledge the relative rise of others. So power is something that is fundamental, responsible exercise of power for the benefit of humankind.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And with that, we will end this session 14 seconds before the clock ends. Thank you.